mechanics. And all living things work on base 12 mechanics, even our directions, north-south, our time, all this coordinates, all works on this base 16 fold deal. Now this gearing, this is where probably why I've been a computer programmer since I was a kid. I learned computer programming back in high school and used it in the military and on through my life, but more in a whole new degree. But when you look at this, this is an absolute gearing of an engine, this base 12 continuum here. And when I use this here as if this was a current or a dollar bill or 60 cents, then this 60 cents would fit right in there perfectly, right into that degree. Now I'll show you more about that in a bit, but the problem is when you're doing navigation, whether it's banking or traveling, we get this whole loss of cohesion due to a simple loss of common denominators. Like they say, the speed of light is so many feet, or excuse me, so many miles per second. And a mile is so many feet, which is base 12, and it keeps track of how many feet by base 10 and how many of those miles by base 10. And that's how many of those per second. So we have 4 fractionals trying to create a simple speed of light. This is pretty ridiculous when you understand when you're adding triangulations, we really need a common denominator. And within base 10 and base 12, as I'm showing you, base 16 fold is a common denominator, and it's absolutely perfect. And I say that because it's not just me been proving it, it's always been proved. The actual timing from 1 second is correct to infinity, which is a beautiful thing when you look at the harmonics of energy within our planets. And when you put time, place, and energy and use the source of energy of humanity for timing in all things, this is relativity. Life math in base 16 fold is relativity. And I'm not stating that. I'm tempting you to prove me wrong. This is just a wonderful thing. Now, why is this such a screw-up? It's because this, look at this well here. Where does all this line up? It doesn't. So, when I was talking about base 12 mechanics, all banking and navigation is done so. When I talked to Larry Larson, and I asked him about that paradigm about the missing dollar, his answer, and he only took 3 seconds to answer me. I've been asking people for over 40 years the answer to that pattern, and what he told me was, he says, you can't do that. That's 2 separate equations separated by the context of time. In other words, this is not common to this. That's what he was saying. Now, I didn't say anything at the time, but of course, Larry and I both have talked about banking and the conundrums and all that. But this is an impossibility. When you use this inside of this transmission, it chews the gears off of this thing that you call decimal points. 10 divided by 3 here is 3.3332 to infinity. Base 16 fold, whether it's 12 or whether it's 60 or whatever bit is absolutely correct to the exact decimal point. It never fractions a decimal. It is always true. This is the squares. And back when I was working with Larry, I seen the answer to all our problems through these shapes because a clock has right triangulation, 3-sided triangulation, within circumference. This is your basic common denominators to all motion. But 12 are not relative to each other to 10. And when you put 10 in motion, 10 does not exist, because when you divide 10 by 3, it becomes 9.999 to infinity, so it can fit in this continuum. Base 12 mechanics. So, when you're looking at this in banking, when you're looking at this, has a 60 characters, and if we were looking at $1, this would actually be 120 characters. So this losing of decimal points gets lost in a harmonics resonance failure, which is kind of like a feedback loop of a guitar or a microphone. It's hard to explain. It is very, very hard to track, because this is all lost in a way and only can be seen in ways of a heat pump, which is how base 16-fold life math works. And I'll get into that kind of stuff later. This is a lot by itself, this base 16-fold. Anyway, so base 10 within the base 12 continuum fractures this decimoids, and almost always it looks like it's what's feeding the corporations. It looks like the corporations that, in a way of people, the more pattern of the smaller monies versus the total day's sales creates an extra kickback to the giant corporations, or at least it looks that way. I question all this, because this is a resonance failure, and it is a son of a gun to track. I've got some computer programs that we're working on, and once we get this trackable and start working on banking and correct the problem rather than looking at our nightmares, because we got plenty of them, trying to find, like I was explaining earlier, this whole paradigm of screw-up is really caused because of the amount of war and stress in humanity. When we are in defensive energy, we get trapped in ourselves. We don't acknowledge the world outside of ourselves as much. So, because of our way of our life all this time, it has created a condition to where we don't look outside of ourselves. And we're getting to that point now. I'm starting to learn this whole thing here was not, I'm sure I learned a lot of it through schooling and pushing my levels, but most of it, all of this is by acknowledging the world outside of me. I didn't learn this, I acknowledged this. And truth by law and science is by acknowledgement, not by head beating. So, as I show you here, base 10 is failing everywhere, and it needs to, because it doesn't work. Now, because we've set up our electrical fields, Nikola Tesla first asked Westinghouse to run the electrical field at 33.3 megahertz, that's 33,300,000 cycles per second, or it's hard to explain it, but that's what he was recommending. Now, the actual cycles of the Earth, or how many seconds there are in a year, is 31,556,000 or somewhere around there, which is very close to what Nikola Tesla said. But it was Westinghouse, along with J.P. Morgan, along with other pushes, and it may look like, oh gosh, they're trying to brainwash us, all these different things. The bottom line, when it comes to business, people are trying to do things cheaper. And by pushing harder with less mass or less wires or size of wires to push it on, makes it easier to run. And I'm not saying that's why, but that's very likely why. But when you start carrying this out, it gives you the absolute triangulation of energy. This unfolding is the harmonics of energy, it's the harmonics of navigation, it's the harmonics of banking. We change our world banking now like this, and because of this base 120 characters in a 100 100 filled, it creates a great deal of the money to incorrectly go to big corporations, possibly. I don't know for sure yet, but for sure it subtracts money by taking out those decimals out of the plenum of the working force, and it drives higher prices of resource. So using this is a failure of our economy. This is why mechanics make the very best computer programmers, because you have to program a working transmission.